Thomas Green here with Ethical Marketing Service. On the podcast today, we have Harrison Tash. Harrison, welcome to the podcast.
Hey, thanks for having me today, Thomas.
It's my pleasure. And would you like to tell the audience a little bit about yourself and what you do?
Yeah, sure. Thanks for introducing me. I've been married for 10 years now. Have two beautiful children. Got a brand new puppy on the way, so my hands are full. I'm a Christian that believes in living out values in the workplace, and for the last handful of years, I've been an organizational development manager. And so it kind of acts as, I don't know if people have heard of a OD practitioner, kind of acts like an internal consultant for a company. And so it's great. I enjoy working for the company. I enjoy being an internal and knowing the aspects of the company versus as a consultant coming from the outside in. But basically my job is to assess company department programs, reinvent, create or change for improvement. So anything all the way from hiring process to training to succession planning, you name it. I've got my hands dipped in it. And so it's a very creative, a very collaborative position, and I really enjoy it.
Good. Well, the topic of discussion today, if I'm not mistaken, is around people development because you have the People Development podcast. Are you happy to talk about this?
Yeah, absolutely.
So, as a start off in terms of definition of terms, what is your definition of people development?
Put simply, Thomas, I think it's a person who has a passion to help others grow as a human, no matter who they are. I like to say if you take a 360 view of everyone that's around you, if you're developing those people, it makes you a people developer. And then it kind of begs the question of what is development? And I think, growth, development, these words kind of go hand in hand. And, I think it can be defined as this. It's getting better in any area of one's life. That's personal, that's work. Doesn't really matter the subject matter. But in the business world, obviously, this is where my podcast comes in. We tend to think of it like a mentor or a coworker, but I think of it's anybody, right? And so to put it kind of simply, that's exactly what it is. It's just a person that has a passion to help others grow. And it doesn't matter if the person reports to you or if they work with you. It's an intentional pursuit of growth for people.
It's a good answer. So, I mean, I know companies would have heard of the concept of training. You're going to get trained for your job. How much would you say people development is about training you on a specific job and, developing you as a person outside of that particular job?
Sure. Well, one of the things I think of is, when you think of training, you think of a sit down, whether you're in a actual session with a bunch of people around you, or if it's one-on-one, or if you think of training on a computer. And I think that is relevant and it is part of people development, but it's just a small portion. If you've ever had, if you have kids, it's a great example, but if you have kids and you think about, as an adult, you assume you're a pretty patient person. And, kids tend to teach you patience just by the little things they do that add up over time. And so it's the same concept in business that as the kids are teaching you patience, although you thought you were great at patience, in this kind of people development world that I'm talking of, it's not just training because it's the small interactions that really add up. And you learn from the guy who's brand new in the organization or the guy who's been there for 40 years. It doesn't matter who it is. You can learn from them and you just have to be open to it. And you have to be open to actually give them a part of your knowledge as well.
I do think, because when I asked the question, I do think that there are a lot of companies that, because there's lots of training resources at the moment on the internet, training is sort of like sit down in front of a computer and do this course and nothing else. And I suppose it comes into my next question, which is, other than that, what are the biggest mistakes leaders make in relation to people development?
Wow, that's a really good question because you could probably think of a lot of good things that people do, but we tend to look at the mistakes that people or leaders do in people development. And if there's one that I think that stands out above the rest, it's really that if you consider yourself someone who is developing people on a regular basis, one of the biggest mistakes you can make is that you tend to care more about yourself getting ahead than other people. And there's just this selfish ambition that will always put a barrier between you and the development of, if it's a person that you're mentoring or a person that you're training, or if it's just a person that reports to you, that's going to be a huge barrier. So if you have selfish ambition, that's one of the biggest mistakes that you can put in, and it can really put a barrier between you and the person that you're trying to develop. But another thing is that you're just inconsistent with your attitude or your work processes. Here's the thing: if you've ever been in a spot where you're just not sure how that person's going to respond, one day they're happy, one day they're super upset. The inconsistency in your attitude is going to tear you apart as a people developer. You have to have a level of consistency, not only to your attitude, but also to the work that you do. Which brings me to another point. You have to be good at what you do. You can't be a people developer and be just okay at what you do. You have to be good at it. You have to be competent in what you do. So you need to excel in your field. And another one is you can't have short vision. You can't have short-sighted vision. You must be able to see things for what they are now, but you need to be able to see things at what they could be. And so I think those things probably stick out the most when you're talking about mistakes that people make in people development.
Well, the what they could be thing is probably going to be very beneficial in relation to the patience you have with someone learning. Would you say
Yeah,
that's accurate?
absolutely. Yeah, I think the vision piece is, some people really excel in vision, like just seeing where it can go, where it can be, and some aren't. But you don't have to be great at the vision piece to be a people developer. You just need to have practice at it, and you need to continually get better at it. That's one of the things that if your vision is very short-sighted, you're only thinking about the now, you're going to make decisions in the now. And that is definitely one of the barriers or mistakes that people developers make that I see in our organization and in other organizations.
Mm. And one of the answers you gave was about being consistent with your behavior. And I
Yeah.
did listen to the People Development podcast. And one of the examples you gave was don't speak to that person was it before he had his coffee or in the AM or
Yeah. Yeah.
would you like to
I've
share
worked,
that?
yeah. I've definitely worked with some individuals where, you definitely don't speak to them before 9 a.m. before they've had their coffee. And if you can imagine, that becomes a bottleneck for people to learn, right? If they constantly have these constraints of when they can go to you or when they can actually come and ask you a question or have that time to be mentored, that's going to make a bottleneck in the situation. And then it just delays the process, or they just don't trust you enough to come back to you.
Mm. The trust thing's big in learning because you're kind of hesitant or not quite sure about the organization, that kind of thing. So
Yeah.
100% agree with that. And it may come into the next question, which is if you had someone who was very interested in what you were saying and they were like, well, in the short time that we have, what three main things would you recommend regarding people development? What are the nuggets?
Yeah, no, that's really good. I took some time to think about that one. And I think there are a lot of different things that you could recommend, but the three main ones would be this. Don't try to become an expert before you try developing others around you. Some people have said this that I've talked to about, well, I've only been doing this for a year or two. I can't start training someone yet, or I can't start pouring into the next person because I don't feel like I'm an expert yet.
Hmm.
And I think that's just a little lie that we tell ourselves sometimes. And it's relieving because, pouring into someone and helping them grow and develop as a person can be a daunting task, right? So don't wait until you become an expert, or, you label yourself as an expert, or someone labels you as an expert to do that. I mean, you got to be competent at what you do, but don't wait, because you're always going to be learning throughout your years. You're always going to be learning. Some of the best conversations I've had with some of the people I would consider, very high on the chart as people developers, 40 years in their career, they say they still learn something new from the guy coming in on the first day of his job. And that's just cool to hear, and that's the best way to look at it. But if you're only 2 years into your career, don't think that you don't have something to pour into the next person. A second point I would say is, be willing to always learn from others, just kind of bleeding into the first point there. But you always have to be willing to learn from others. Like I said, even the guy coming in on the first day, the guy coming out of college, you have to be willing, and you have to tell yourself as a people developer that you can learn something from them. You just have to pay attention. And as you pour into them, you start to take those little nuggets from them, and you add it to your resume. You add it to your collection of people development tools. And I think that's one of the biggest things. And, I mentioned the thing about learning from kids earlier. I think that's so true. When I became a parent, I thought, man, I pretty much know most of the things of life, and then the kids just teach you so much just by the way they react and how they respond to things. And it teaches you about your patience. It teaches you about your consistency and discipline. And if you think of, and you apply that to the workplace, how many things can you learn from the people that are new in your organization? People who have been there for 40 years. We talked about people that are new, but what about people that have been there for that long, 50 years, 40 years? Sometimes the younger people come in thinking, oh, they don't know how to run a computer. They don't know how to do this technically. I don't think I'm going to learn anything from that person. The truth of the matter is they have a gold mine. You just have to dig in it and get it. And that takes time. So 2, be willing to learn from others. And then 3, I would say reflect often and challenge yourself. If as a people developer, you don't learn to reflect and see what needs to change with you, and if you don't learn to challenge yourself to keep growing, you're never going to be good at doing that with other people. And so you have to learn to do that. And there's a big piece to that holds it all together, and that's accountability. You got to find different ways to hold you accountable. If there's one way that I've found that holding yourself accountable works, is invite people into your life, whether you work with them or they're friends, or, like I said, people development is not just at work. It's all the way around. It's 360. And so I think one of the things that you can do is invite those people into your life to say, hey, you know what? I'm working on this. Would you mind holding me accountable on this? And trust me when I say this, that invitation into holding you accountable definitely creates trust that helps them receive things well from you when you're trying to develop them.
Well, I've actually heard of, I think it was like a type of app or something. And I'm not sure it was a workplace example, but I think it was like a run a half marathon example or something like that. And it's like you give accountability to, like, let's say your best friend or something, and you put, let's say $500 into escrow or something. And if you're able to do that half marathon, or you show up to the half marathon, then you get your $500 back. And if you don't show up, then your best friend is able to release that money to the charity.
Yeah, now that is taking accountability to the new heights, isn't it? I like that. That's good.
Have you got any examples of accountability that you like?
Yeah, I think, like I said, inviting people into your life is a great example for me. But yeah, there are some different ways that I have tried with accountability. One of the ways that I think has really helped me with accountability is that I find someone who's going through the same type of struggle that I am. So yeah, let's just strip this down. I'll be real honest with the audience here. Whether you know me or not, I struggled with being a direct conversationalist for a long time. Like, I would beat around the bush if I was asking something. If I really needed to tell you something to be blunt or to be honest, it'd be really hard for me to do it. And so one of the things I learned is okay, if I'm going to call myself a people developer, I got to learn to be able to tell the brutal facts to someone and say, hey, honestly, from my perception, this is what I see. And, especially when they're your friend or they're a really close coworker, it can be really hard to do that and to do it well. And I think it takes a lot of empathy. So one of the ways that I've found is you find someone who's struggling with that same thing. It's easier to hold each other accountable when you both struggle with it, right? Um, and then another thing is find some mentors, some really good mentors. People have a lot of experience who really want to meet with you on a regular basis. And I think that's what defines it as a mentor, right? It's an arranged time bound type thing where you say, hey, let's meet once a week, let's meet once a month. People development's not that entirely. I mean, people development can be as simple as, you see your coworker struggling on this and you decide you're going to help them. But find some mentors that are really going to pour into your life, someone who's got good experience in that. For instance, if you're wanting to be good at public speaking, well, don't go to the person who's struggling with public speaking as a mentor. Go to the person who's really good at it and ask them if they'd be your mentor. And then you have to, like I said before, you have to invite them in to say, you know what, I want you to hold me accountable. How should I get better at this? They might say, join Toastmasters, or start your own podcast, or start interviewing people and start getting the conversations going. So I think those are some ways that you can definitely do the accountability piece. None of those match what you just said, though. That app sounds amazing. So I think that might be all for accountability right there.
Well, coming back to, I think it was the second thing that you mentioned about you can learn from other people. I just wanted to raise something because when training, I've often found that people will ask you things like, for example, new people, which is what I was going to talk to you about next, will ask you questions that perhaps you haven't thought about before. So like it comes back to, we do things a certain way. And so you train that way. And then someone asks you, oh, why do you do it like this? And you actually don't have the answer. And then, as you say, you can then go check, go learn, and then add it to your own knowledge.
Yeah.
So I just wanted to add that example. But coming back to new employees, because we're talking about people development in general, what are your thoughts about developing new employees specifically?
Yeah, this is something that I've thought pretty heavily about. And if you've ever picked up a book on onboarding employees, there's a lot of them out there. And I think they all have a good relevance to certain pieces of them. But for me, I had to come up with a model for myself. For any organization that I might be helping, I want to have a model available. And so I've come up with this with new employees for people development. We need to look at it in 4 broad categories. The first one is prep. The second one is mentor, then release, then support. So prep, mentor, release, support. And I came up with this model because I realized that a lot of people skip the prep. And I'll give a quick overview of what prep is. We need to, as organizations, be able to tell employees why the company exists. Like, what is the reason? Now, a lot of people think of mission statements, and that's good, but you got to make it more. You got to make it more relevant for them, like even more personable. If they're in accounting, why does the accounting department exist? If you're in safety, why does safety exist? If you're in operations, why does that exist? So you need to dive deeper into the organization and give them the reason why their job exists, not just why the company exists, but why their job exists. And then in prep, I think another thing to mention is expectations, standards, and training are all important. It's always good when someone's coming into an organization, if you want to develop them quickly, you've got to focus on this prep stage, which does involve training. You need to evaluate what they need right off the bat and figure out how you're going to get it to them faster. Because in the prep stage, you're going to do a lot of listening. You're going to do a lot of job shadowing, if you will, or a lot of cross-referencing. But you're not going to be hands-on right away. And so in the prep stage, I think you really need to focus on making sure they understand the standards and the expectations and getting that training as well. And then in the mentor stage, make sure that your company is really focusing on who are the people who represent your company well and do what they do very well. A lot of people think, well, John's been here in this company for 40 years, so he's a great mentor. We need to have him be the mentor. Well, that's not always the case. I'd rather have someone that only has 5 years experience, but is very apt to help people in what they do and help people learn. Now that's a great mentor because they're always going to find the answer. You talked about earlier that, when people ask the questions, you may not always know the answer to those questions, but if you're a good mentor, if you're someone who's a good people developer, you're going to always find the answer for them or find someone who has the answer for them. And then the third one was release. And this is where they get all their opportunity. They get their opportunity to show you that they can do it, to show you that they've been listening, that they've been paying attention to the people developer, the mentor at that time too, whoever it is. And then check in when needed, which is the support stage. Make sure that they understand that they can ask questions anytime. Don't be the bottleneck to them, and don't allow them to not ask questions and just try to make their own mistakes, because every organization has probably made every mistake at least once already. And we don't do a great job of sharing those mistakes. And so in the release and support stage, that's another important aspect, which is, make sure that they understand that any question they have, run it by you if it's a question that they really have uncertainty on. And so again, the stages I think are prep, mentor, release, and support.
That's a very detailed, very good answer. Hope you don't mind me saying.
Yeah, no, thank you. I appreciate that.
Well, coming back slightly to accountability, I think people know, generally speaking, how to set goals for themselves, but how would you go about setting goals for a team?
Yeah, that's good. And this is an important aspect of being a people developer, because we all know when we put goals in front of us, it does help us get to that quicker. Especially, everyone's probably heard this, you're 50% more likely to do the goal if you write it down. So when you're setting goals for teams, I really do like this acronym. It's the SMART acronym: specific, measurable, attainable, realistic, and time constrained. I know some people think it's ran its course. Honestly, I think it's a really good acronym to use. It's easy to remember. And again, you can say you've made a SMART goal, which just makes sense. So I think if you're making goals for teams, you can break it down into broad categories and then specific categories, and you allow it to kind of attach itself. And here's what I mean. Your broad categories might be budget, schedule, the how you do what you do on the project. These are broad category type goals. So for example, it might be we're going to come under budget, within schedule, ethically, and we're going to make sure we communicate well with the client. That can be a goal right there, and that's a broad goal. Now, I would say you don't really come up with more than 2 or 3 broad goals at a time. So whatever your period of time is for this goal, make sure you don't come up with more than 2 or 3, because past that, it just starts to get a little convoluted and a little too complex for people to keep track of them. But from the broad goals, then break it down into small goals that people can turn into initiative plans, if you will, action plans. And so if you're one of your goals was to stay under budget and stay within the schedule for a project, if that's one of your goals, obviously it needs to be time bound. So what time period are we talking about? First quarter of the year, first half of the year? And then from there, make some small goals for individuals on your team on how they can achieve this. It might be, we need to do a report every 2 weeks on the budget. I need a report every 2 weeks, and then you're going to get it in an hour before the due date so that we can all review it together. It could be as simple as that. Now that has turned into action plans. I like to use Microsoft Teams. This is something that's actually newer to me as far as me using it within people development. But I think it's a great tool to be able to do a collaborative center where you can do goals like this on there. There's lots of different softwares you can use for goal setting. I would say keep it simple as best as possible. The more you complicate the system, the more people get lost within those goals. If you guys have ever read, if the audience has ever read the book Measure What Matters by John Dewar, he was at Intel and at Google. He has a great system talking about OKRs, which is objectives and key results. Kind of reminds you of KPIs or something similar to that. But the point is if you don't put what the goal is, you don't put the objective, it's not specific. If it's not a time constrained component to it, and if it's not realistic and it's too convoluted, then the teams are not going to follow those goals. And then I guess to put the cherry on top, the thing that you have to do is remember to always come back to it. Patrick Liccioni likes to say chief reminding officer. And I think it's a funny term. It's kind of easy to remember, but it's true. When you're a leader of a team and you consider yourself the people developer, or if you're a coworker on the team and you consider yourself the people developer, your job then becomes that accountability piece, the glue that holds it all together. And you got to become the chief reminding officer. And it's just got to be something that you put on your calendar, that you put on other people's calendar to hold them accountable to the goals that they're trying to achieve.
Well, how do you think that it's, because you mentioned about SMART goals and whether or not it's run its course, but do you think that there might be a case for SMART goals being more effective for teams than individuals? Like if an individual doesn't particularly like that approach, but it might be better for a team, do you think that there might be something to that?
Yeah, that's a good point of view because the SMART acronym definitely is something that if when you try to put it into personal goals, it can be a little bit too constraining. It feels like you're putting on all these different things to a goal. And what people tend to do personally, especially when it's just an individual goal, is that they tend to make it more like check boxes than goals, right? It's like, I want to make sure that I wake up tomorrow morning, go to work and achieve something. That might be a goal for a day. And it's like, well, what is achieving, And you use the SMART acronym to make that even better. And it's like, that's great, but you tend to do check boxes for yourself. So I think it could be something more relevant for teams. And going forward, it's always been something that's just for goals in general. But when you're doing personal goals, one of the things that I like to say is just focus on one or two at a time. Don't get too wrapped up for making yourself 7 or 8 New Year's resolution goals. So I think you could be right in that. Maybe the SMART acronym is something more, I guess, more relative to teams than it is personally. But I think it can be used for both.
Because the reason I mention it, and I haven't thought about this until now, because you brought that up, is because one of the criticisms of SMART goals is that there are some people who think that you should make your goals, audacious, really, really big goals, so that even if you don't meet them, you end up getting closer than you would if you had like a realistic goal. But if you have certain team members who, don't agree with that and they just want to see, something realistic for them to meet, you can see that like a team might get quite disheartened by having a goal which is essentially unrealistic. So
yeah, no, that's a good point. One of the things I think of when you say that is hey, shoot for the moon and maybe you'll make it to whatever that saying is.
You'll land among the stars.
Yeah, you'll land among the stars, and that's a great way to look at it, I think. But if you're like me, when you make goals that are really unrealistic, but they might shoot you to a different goal that's better than what you could ever imagine. If you're like me, you might get a little bit discouraged in that because it feels like you didn't make the actual goal that you wanted to attain. But somewhere in the middle, I would say, is the sweet spot. Make it just a little bit past so that it stretches you, but doesn't scar you. You've probably heard that too. So yeah, that's a great point, Thomas.
Well, one thing I think, if you do have a team and you're trying to set them goals, I think what a lot of people will come up against, if they have a team large enough, that is if a team member doesn't really show any interest in it, or perhaps any interest in development at all. So what advice would you have if that were the case?
Yeah, and that's like a multifaceted question there. I mean, I think I appreciate these
Thanks
very
for
interesting.
that.
Yeah, yeah, it's a very good question, and it really it does depend. I mean, here's the first advice I'd give is don't be so quick to just pull the trigger and make a decision right away. I think as people developers, we have to learn to assess. You got to assess why is that happening? Is it the team leader? Is it the culture? Is it something about the jobs, like the positions that the team members are in? And are they, maybe there's team members who are picking up other people's slack. And so when you try to make goals for them, it's like, hey, I'm already doing two jobs. So I think we need to learn to assess it. We can't be so quick to just say what's going on. And as people developers, I think one of the great tools that I've learned to use well is the 5 Dysfunctions of a Team by Patrick Lencioni. I think he makes a great a great model of what a dysfunctional team is. And out of the dysfunctions, you will see a lack of interest in team members because there are things going on, such as politics, or maybe they don't know how to have good conflict. Maybe they're not paying attention to the results. These are some things out of his model. And so I think that if we use a model like that, then we're able to maybe assess the situation and see what's really going on. Always looking for the root of the problem, not just the surface level stuff, is what I would say is probably the best way for you to get to your answer of why does this person show a lack of interest, whether it's in goals or just in team development period. No matter what, though, I think we need to be transparent, and we need to have a level of empathetic candidness with whoever that is on the team about their performance and what's going on. We need to be empathetic in how we deal with the situation and handle it, if you will.
Just out of interest, have you had any examples of that yourself? Any personal examples?
Just things that I've ran into as being in the people development role. Yeah, I certainly have. One of the things that I've found that happens, I'd say this has happened more than a handful of times just in the last couple of years, is that people come into the organization and they have habits that are formed from just them in school, or if it's them at another employer. These habits start to form, and it creates kind of who they are as an employee. And so we always have a bar to raise for what you'd call capacity, right? Like, what's this person's capacity? How far are they going to go? And one thing that you run into when you see people have a lack of interest in development or the goals that you created for them, you see them hit a wall. And once they hit that wall, it's like they get discouraged. They start to make errors. They start to feel burnt out. There are a lot of things that when that person hits the wall, because maybe they've hit their capacity, but I don't believe that. I think everyone has another bar to raise. It's a matter of, can you see yourself getting there? And when you run into that, the one thing I like to assess is just, where did they come from? Especially if they're new to the organization, where did they come from? And what are some of these habits they have? What are some of the things that they've been told through their lifetime? Believe it or not, some people are told that they're never going to be more than this, right? And that's a mental thing. So now you're assessing some mental capabilities of the person. You're saying, man, like, what's making you feel this way? Why do you feel like you can't get past this? Why do you feel like you can't handle this kind of workload? I know you can, but why can't you? And so, yeah, I've ran into things like that. And I think in that situation, people have to get over their own mental wall before they can get past it and keep developing. And to be honest with you, Thomas, some people, you assess it as best as you can, and some people just aren't a right fit for an organization. And as people developers in all organizations, we have to be willing to say, this may not be the best fit for you. Maybe this isn't the right fit for you. And that's never a fun conversation. But you know what? I've heard great stories. We've had people leave organizations that I've helped, and they've left, and they've actually called and thanked them. Like, you know what? It was a great conversation. Thanks for being empathetic, and thanks for being candid with me. I'm doing really well at this organization, because you're right. It wasn't the best fit for me there, but it is working for me here.
I have heard that before about having that type of conversation. Is very much possible anyway that you might be doing them a favor, because they might be in a type of rut or something, and it might be the help that they need to go and do something more rewarding.
Yeah. And to answer your question, just in a general sense, like, don't forget to assess it, but also don't ever rule out the fact that maybe it's just not a good fit. Maybe their lack of interest in development is because your organization doesn't fit their values, their needs. So I think that's two good things to keep in mind.
The first thing that you mentioned made me think of Tony Robbins' quote, where he says it's basically about raising your standards. And you mentioned that it may be the case that people are just, they have set standards, and all you have to do is just convince them to raise them. And then, you get better performance, essentially. Is that kind of what you were going for?
Yeah, I think so. And one of the ways that I like to put that is don't push people, pull people. When you're pulling someone, you're helping them up. When you're pushing people, you're forcing them into a situation. So however you word it, however you try to people develop in that moment, is make sure that you're pulling them in the right direction, not pushing them in the right direction.
Carrying on from what we said about goals, are you happy to share your goals?
Yeah, I have some. We all have these very personal goals, whether it's work related or not. And I shared one earlier that I just really wanted to be one of the goals that I had for myself, that I was really holding myself accountable to, was trying to be more direct in my talk and how I speak to others, and again, having empathy in it, but also being very direct, so that honestly, that it just sped up the process of people development, whether it was for me or for someone else. And some things that I did in that was I joined some groups. One of them was Toastmasters, which teaches you to talk in a shortened amount of time faster and get to the point, which I think has helped me. But some other things that I've done is I've joined some groups of people who are also on that same journey about just being better in their speech and being able to relay and being able to get out of their mind what they need to, whether it's whether it's direct or not. But in that sense, it's just helping them articulate better. And I think that's helped me be able to be more direct in my communication as well. But going forward, some of the goals that I've had for myself, especially in our organization, is, one of the goals I have is to help my company grow in gross revenue by another 50 million within 5 years. And you can see it's it's attainable. It's very specific. It is measurable. And how I'm going to do that is strengthening our department leaders with good succession plans, continuing to build our bench by bringing in new talent, and help expand in new territories by, again, helping the leaders find new people, helping the leaders grow those people. And so that's one of the goals I have for myself in the organization I'm at. And then another one I have that's a little bit outside of my work now, but more into the, I guess, if you call it the consulting world, is to create my own model for the development cycle. I want to do this by 2025. So I'm trying to partner with some people who do research, and I'd like to do some international research as well. And I'm trying to create a strong team to join the venture. And so that's some things that I'm doing. And again, that goal is just to create my own model for people development, or the development cycle, if you will. And I think it can help organizations understand better of what employees need in order to develop faster and better and be able to not only be great in the workplace, but be great in their own family lives as well, outside of work, so that it strengthens your organizations, which I think is very important.
Well, I hope you do get back in touch when you have developed that.
Yeah. Well, 2025 is my goal. So we'll see how fast we're able to make that one happen. But that's the goal. Yeah.
Well, do you have any closing thoughts, or perhaps anything which you feel is valuable, which we haven't discussed today?
Yeah. Thanks for asking that. I would encourage everyone to think back in your career. Think about those jobs that you had, the areas in life that you were at, the place that you were in life, and think about if you had someone who developed you. How would you have developed faster or better or differently if you would have had someone around you who poured into you? But on the flip side, I also would encourage the audience to think about all the people who really did do that, who took the time to develop you, to pour into you and help you grow. And it could be as simple as, maybe it was your grandmother, but maybe it was that coworker. Think back to those situations and think about the great things they did. And if you can think about how that grew you as a person, take that and put it into your people development skills and try to reflect and learn off those, because I guarantee you people development may be a term that that I like to use, but all the terms that you can think of what it means that you took those things from, like whether it was a mentor, whether it was training, whether it was a family member or a friend. Those are all people development moments. And I think that if you can reflect on those and learn from them, I think that is one of the things that can carry you far into becoming a great people developer. And it really just takes an effort, and it takes a willingness to care about people more than you care about yourself.
Sounds very much like the golden rule applied to people development.
Yeah, yeah, it really does. And you know what? That golden rule, treat people as you want to be treated, right? That golden rule is something that I think we should never grow out of, right? We learned it in kindergarten, but I think it's just something that is it should be carried out in life for sure.
Well, I think that's probably the best place to end, because that's a profound thing to end on. Harrison Tash, where is the best place for people to find you?
Yeah, I am on all the major platforms, Spotify, Google, Audible, Apple Podcast. If you just type in the search bar, People Development Podcast, you can search my name, Harrison Tash, into those search bars. You'll find the podcast. But if you ever want to get a hold of me directly, just go to harrisontash@gmail.com. That's a place that I would be willing to really get some feedback, get some suggestions on what would be good for the podcast later to be able to go over in the podcast or talk about. I would love to hear that from people in the audience for sure.
Well, thank you for all the great information. I think you've given brilliant answers, and I will speak to you soon.
Yes, thanks, Thomas. Appreciate you having me on.